The spiritual fulfillment, one way of understanding it is the metabolism of values, to have these values, encircuited, embodied, as you mentioned. And a pragmatic way of thinking about that is, how do you practice goodness, truth, and beauty? And the answer, I think, is pretty straightforward. You practice truth by learning and teaching, right? You're learning, and then especially, the learning is not complete until you've demonstrated it or taught it out or given it out in some way, so that there's literally a metabolism of that value. Beauty is the same thing. In other words, it involves appreciation and ideally some kind of expression. Even if you may not be painting paintings, you might want to tidy up your house to make it a little bit more beautiful, right? So that as creating beauty and appreciating beauty, broadly understood as aesthetic value, is how you practice that value. And the same could be said about the good or morality or excellence. There's many ways of defining that idea. But you take it in and you give it out, right? You take it in some ways by devotion. Right, that Blaise Pascal, the 17th century philosopher, said that human things must be known in order to be loved, but divine things must be loved in order to be known. And so, in order to take in goodness, you have to actually feel it in your body in a way that you I want to get the word right. I mean, devotion is a word that I like to use, but just enthusiasm can work. I mean, in other words, something that makes you feel alive and like, that's really good. That's what I'm willing to sacrifice my self-interest for. Maybe it's your family, or maybe it's your vocation. Maybe it's world peace. Maybe it's, scientific progress. There's many different higher purposes that people can commit themselves to. And many psychologists have pointed out that having some kind of higher purpose is a prerequisite to your psychological health. But not only do you take it in by appreciating it or learning it or devoting yourself to it, there's also a giving out element of creating the value of goodness. And that is basically through service, being of service, right? Whether it's to your family or to your culture or to the humanity, there's many ways. But you have to create some goodness in order to be able to appreciate its value energy. And people can metabolize these values within every one of these worldviews and make the world a better place, where they stand. You don't have to adopt, the next great worldview on the horizon of history to be able to engage in this practice. But ultimately, the opportunity, I'd say that the most exciting opportunity in history in our time is the fact that there's this new worldview emerging, right? So if you lived in 1470, wouldn't you want to perhaps live in Florence, where the action was, right? There was a renaissance going on, new art, new architecture, new ways of thinking about the world. We're experiencing something now. It's not happening in Florence. It's not happening really in any one particular town. It's happening online. It's happening in this conversation. And so we're on the verge of witnessing this next great emergence. But again, I don't want to sound like some kind of prophet. It may take 100 years. I mean, if we look at history, there were people who were thinking in Enlightenment ways 100 years before it burst forth and created the Enlightenment. Same with progressive postmodernism. We can see many people who are proto-postmodern 100 years before the 60s. So again, there's an unpredictability, but the idea that there's this new value, new truth, new goodness, and new beauty that's arising now, I think that's a very exciting opportunity for anybody who is inclined to engage with that. And so how can they do so? I would say, well, right now, it's philosophy that's leading the way. It's the new truth, which is leading the way. I mean, like in the 60s, it was beauty. The music really it invited people and was the clarion call to turn on, tune in, drop out. But in the Enlightenment before that, it was the philosophy, and it was a fairly elite segment of the population, right? I mean, first of all, the majority of the population wasn't literate, but it didn't take the majority to adopt an enlightened perspective to bring about the United States, for example. It was people who were educated, and they were a leading edge, and they acted as a lever. And I think we can perhaps predict, or at least anticipate, that something similar will happen in this second enlightenment, that what's emerging first is the new truth. And how do you do that? You learn and you teach. So you listen to podcasts, you read the books, you go to the conferences, you try to participate in the emerging ways this culture is trying to, sprout. And that's at least one opportunity to do so. And hopefully people who are inspired by the truth will be empowered to create the new beauty, the new aesthetic expressions and the new goodness, the new service at every level that this new set of values is making possible.